And Sean, since you're speaking, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do with CODA, how CODA utilizes this types of technology?
Yes, absolutely. So CODA does just about a little bit of everything. We're flying drones. We're using 360 cameras. We do a lot of laser scanning. Our laser scanning, we use it for, again, a little bit of everything, whether it's site logistics and how we know our site's going to end up working. We'll scan it beforehand. Progress tracking. We use it for, we do some modeling from point cloud data, so scan to BIM for some of our clients. So a little bit of everything is what I like to say that we do.
Awesome. Ian, you wanna jump in there with WSP?
Yes, with the survey background, geospatial coordination is key to any project success, especially when you're dealing with larger indoor-outdoor projects. I do a lot with the transportation and infrastructure, so we get a lot of major highway, tunnel, bridge work. And when you're on site, it's great to have a grid line, but when you're on such a large bridge site, you really need to rely on survey baselines and those accuracies in order to establish where you are in space. That way you guarantee where you're working is the proper space and you're installing in the right location.
Right, right. And you want to talk about a little bit about how you utilize reality capture and scanning within WSP?
I've been doing laser scanning for 10 to 15 years now and watched it advance from being where it was too much data for the computer to handle to now too much data for the end user to handle on their workstation. I like to see it revolutionized where it's auto extracted, where we see a lot more feature extraction from the point clouds to kind of lighten the load of the data set. Many times I have clients who say, yeah, we had it laser scanned, but no one can use the data. And that's unfortunate because it's such a good asset to work with. It just takes the proper people in the right set of hands to get what you need out of that data and how to utilize it effectively.
Absolutely. And of course now with BIM 360 and other things, it's always a, how do we even visualize this? Where does it live? What do we want to do with it? How would you say, and I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and throw up a poll, or maybe just throw up a poll in addition to sharing. How is WSP, which is a huge engineering firm, we're working with them at Smith Group, how do you guys utilize reality capture? What do you use it for? Clash coordination and a bunch of things, primarily?
Really throughout the project lifecycle, from pre-demolition, we'll do laser scanning. For our site work, we'll pull out the traditional aerial survey, later supplement that with drones and on-the-ground survey, all the way through the demolition phase to where we're laying out stockpile areas. Then through the construction and coordination phase, we're laying out in 3D where MEP elements are going, structural elements are to be placed, helping the on-site people not pull tape anymore, especially when you're dealing with complex environments. It's gone way past pulling out your tape measure and trying to figure out with the plumb bob where you go. Whereas with survey, you can lay out in 3D certain runs, utilize that information in the field.
Awesome, thank you for sharing. And Sean, how would you say that you at CODA, your teams are kind of pushing the boundaries with this types of technology, obviously being in the construction side of things?
We do a lot of analysis is kind of where we kind of do it, as CODA is short for construction data. So we take our point cloud data and we try to do a lot of analysis. Probably the heavy side is deviational analysis, where things are where they were supposed to be. And then also just collecting that data to use down the road. So CODA is a Clark Construction affiliate. Clark builds a lot of buildings. If we can harness everything that we've collected to use down the road for future projects, it's going to help Clark be a better builder and help our clients up front at the beginning stage. So we're doing a lot of things to hold that data so then we can have it for future projects, so projects start off on the right foot. That's where we're kind of pushing it a little bit.
Awesome. And Rafi, you probably see quite a bit of things being in your situation, in your seat. How are you seeing groups using this type of technology, or are you kind of seeing along the lines of what Tim is doing?
Yeah, so it's definitely very varied. You know, a lot of people are using it. I think the most common still use for reality capture today, and that was reflected in the poll we just did, is for some kind of scan to BIM, right? Either, or typically at the beginning of a project, people are scanning the existing conditions so that they can create a BIM model from that. And that's typically where it stops. More and more our clients, though, are also using our system to do deviation tracking over the course of construction. And one of the nice things about our system is that you can actually, with the click of a button, update the BIM based on the analysis of the scan. So it's not this call to your architect, them having to move something, or the call to the sub and then having to move something and call you back. It's just one and done. And then also for progress tracking. So, Tim was talking about keeping score. This is a way to kind of keep score with everybody, make sure everybody's actually on schedule, right? If you have a really tight ability to quantify and track progress for each vendor that you're using, it gives a much deeper sense of control to either the GC, the owner, or both when they're implementing a project.
It actually looks like Raj has another question. Keep them coming, Raj. We love it. Does Avir decipher ductwork by system or piping by system?
So that's a really good question. The algorithm itself isn't really doing that. We rely on the BIM to have those systems broken out for us. And then what the algorithm is really doing is it's matching the elements in the point cloud to the elements in the BIM. So it knows that this ductwork is connected to a system, right? It knows which pieces of ductwork are connected to each other. And then if it can match that set of objects with a set of objects that carries certain information in the BIM, right? It's labeled, that system is labeled with, cold water pipe in the BIM, then it can associate that information with that piece of the scan. In a vacuum, right, if we didn't have the BIM to compare to, we wouldn't necessarily be able to say, oh, that ductwork is, the return, and that ductwork is sending out the error. But by having that BIM to compare to and having that BIM properly labeled, we can do a lot of interesting stuff. So yeah.
Awesome. That is fantastic. I know that would save so much time and coordination, just being able to know what it is you're looking at, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just huge amount of time. So I kind of want to go around, and Rafi, since we're talking to you, where do you see the industry going in terms of how just the way we work? It's obviously changed quite a bit in terms of, especially working remotely, we're able to see a lot of things just virtually that we wouldn't be able to see, because we can't even go to site sometimes. So how are you seeing maybe where this goes tomorrow or next year or 5 years?
Yeah, so I actually think this is, the COVID crisis is speeding us toward a new normal in construction. I think, we were headed there eventually anyway, basically toward increased automation and a more remote project team regardless. And I think this is necessitating it. Obviously, I don't think anybody wants to not be able to go to site. You want to be able to do what you want to do. But there are a lot of times where a project management team doesn't necessarily want to have to be on site. Or if you're a general contractor and you've got one amazing superintendent, you want him to be able to serve multiple projects at once. And with the reality capture ecosystem exploding as it is due to this crisis, I actually think things like that will be possible and just normal going forward. I think that's the new normal we're going to return to, is a situation where you can visit the site whenever you want, but you don't have to as often as you used to. There will be increased automation in terms of just monitoring the site from a management perspective. And I think unrelated to that, I think you're also going to see an increase in robotics and, in terms of just labor replacement. That's already happening as well.
One of the things, and feel free, Rafi or whomever, one of the things that really intrigues me is facilities management. And I mean, obviously we've been trying to get our facilities manager to just use the BIM and to make that move for a long time. But I can see a huge benefit for a facilities manager to, if there's a leak, to be able to look at a three-dimensional model and say, the pipe from upstairs is running right back there. That's probably it, right? I mean, I can see so much.
That was the first story we would tell investors when we were doing our initial raise. It was actually two stories that actually happened to friends of mine who were involved in facility management. One was actually a leak that happened at a building at the Carnegie Mellon University campus, which is where I kind of came up with the idea for this company. A leak that should have been a leak that was solved in a couple of minutes and only cost a couple $100s to resolve. But because they couldn't, the facility manager went to the utility closet where the shutoff valve was supposed to be, and it wasn't there, and it took another 5 hours to identify where that shutoff valve actually was. That that $500 leak turned into a $50,000 leak.
Oh my goodness. Just because they were digging everything up and trying to
Because
find it behind the
they
walls.
couldn't find it. We had a friend of mine was doing a renovation at a hospital in California. This was just an amazing story. I think it made the news, actually. They started sawing through a wall in the hospital, and it was only a wing of the hospital that was shut down for renovation. The rest of the hospital was operating. So they start sawing through what they assumed was, or what they believed was, a blank wall based on the existing plans.
And like the oxygen pipe was back there.
They go through the oxygen pipe.
Oh my goodness.
And thank God it's, plastic tubing, so no sparks, which would have been a huge disaster. But there's somebody in an operating room who is now without oxygen. So, alarms start going off. It gets crazy. There was actually a life and death situation at play. So
absolutely.
We definitely see the need for this in facility management. I think facility managers are starting to catch on as well. We have an eye to eventually move into that space and serve that space as well as the construction space. We see, the building life cycle is one holistic thing that, where a system like ours should be able to serve the building from construction through demolition. But we decided to start with construction problems rather than facility management problems, because the issue that all facility management digital twin solutions have today is that they're going off of a BIM that isn't necessarily the as-built version of the building. And then your digital twin isn't as useful as it could be.
It's a twin.
Yeah, it's not really a twin.
It's not a twin.
Yeah.
Yeah. The one thing that really compounds that then is if the model's not accurate, then we're starting off on the wrong foot. And the other piece of that is, from what I've seen is we always say, well, here's a Navisworks model. Why aren't you using it? It's fantastic. Just use it. And the facility manager's like, I can't use that model. I'm in this platform. And it's this fighting of platforms where it's, hey, we've got this model. Why don't you use it? Well, I can't use that model. I need it in this format, or I need it in that format. Kobe starts getting thrown around. And so there's that opposing, well, we want to do what we need to do that's easy, convenient, and serves our needs. And we want to force you to use what we give you versus trying to marry those two up from the start.
And I'll just add on to that. When we got into the space, I mentioned that our biggest problem, the biggest ask from customers today is around automating the reality capture workflow. But when we first started, the biggest technical hurdle we had was exactly that, the interoperability problem of BIM. And Navisworks is a particularly powerful offender when it comes to that. It's very hard to make that work. Autodesk has kind of recognized that. They're working on fixing it, but it's a slow-moving beast. So we had to take it on ourselves to make sure everything worked together so that you could bring a Tekla model, a Revit model, a Smart Plant model all into one system.
And not just get an IFC export that dumbs it down completely.
Exactly, so you can bring it back. Yeah.
Awesome. Sean, I assume that you probably work quite a bit, especially in the handoff process to the facilities management team. Are you seeing any interest from them, or where would you see the future of this? I guess it's kind of a two-part question. Where would you see the future of reality capture and scanning going from Coda's perspective, I guess?
All right, so I feel like there's kind of like a two-part question there. One on the future of kind of reality capture, and then one on how it relates to the facilities management side. In regards to the future of reality capture, I think probably the most used tool is going to end up being your phone. I think there's going to be different ways you're just taking photos. Sensors in the camera sensors and phones are just going to keep on getting better and better and better. Mm-hmm. And that's going to make the photogrammetry work that much better. And I think that's going to be used a lot to stitch together certain areas. Like construction, a lot of times they just want to know something about this one area right now. So if they can go out there, take a whole bunch of photos with their phone, maybe there's some type of targeting up, whatever. We're talking future stuff, so I don't know what all the answers are. And that just goes pop right into a model, and then they can see all those different issues. That's what they're going to want. They need those answers right now. So that's where I think one of the real kind of a practical thing that could be the future of reality capture. Now, how it relates to the facilities management side is that digital twin thing that everyone talks about now is going to just become a reality. I mean, everyone is talking about it. The models are going to become much more of a living thing, and people are going to actually start updating them per things like the software that Tim and Rafi were showing with Avir. That's going to those type of things are going to happen where the model actually gets updated throughout the entire thing, and you're going to end up with that final as-built model that then gets brought out as just really an asset. And then every little thing, every asset inside of there is going to be smart. It's just not going to be a dumb valve that you can't find buried behind a wall. It's going to be a water valve that holds this much flow. If that flow reduces down to this much, it's going to send off an alarm. People knows, someone silly manager knows where it is, and he can actually hopefully find it. I mean, that's where it's going to go, hopefully.
I think one of the things that really plays into these conversations is using the right piece of technology for the task at hand. And so I know with COVID, virtual is now this new norm that we're all forced into. And how do you do a punch walk virtually? We can't fly our design team from California, from Boston, from New York to our job site to do this punch walk. And so using things like Matterport, it's close to a laser scanner in fidelity, but it's closer to the speed of 360 photos in capture speed. And so using the right technology to get the right fidelity to answer the questions that are being asked is going to be the new norm. We may, hopefully on this job, we stop flying the design team all around the country to answer these questions that we can answer with AR. We can capture it, discuss it, they can walk it. Facility now has a replica with really high-res photos. They can zoom, they can measure. They don't have to go out there to figure out what the potential problem is. They can see the alarm, look at that spot in the virtual world, get a game plan, grab the right tools, go out and solve the problem the first time. So a lot of this comes down to not getting hung up on grabbing the convenient solution, and it's more, or the flashy solution. It's more stepping back and saying, what is the definition of success? What are those things that could make or break the outcome of this effort, and deciding the right piece of technology to solve those needs. COVID's just forcing us to think through that in real time.
Definitely pushing us forward in that. And like you said, I mean, it's also giving us a leverage of finding projects that aren't necessarily local, right? Mm-hmm. Which is a huge benefit for, some people who aren't able to get work as easily. So actually, we're going to bring in Thomas. Thomas has a few questions for the panel. Hopefully we can get him in. Nick Seiss is going to bring Thomas Bayless in. Can you hear us, Thomas?
Yes. Am I unmuted? I guess
you are.
We can hear you.
There was a reference to using proper label formats to have the scan match up to the BIM model.
Yep.
By proper format, is it meant Revit default labels? Or I'm not a Revit modeler, by the way. I manage people. I try and learn a little bit, so maybe it's a silly question.
No, and not a silly question at all. So what I was mentioning is, in order for our system to know, or for our algorithm to know what system a particular object is part of, that information needs to be in the BIM. There are such things as proper labeling. I mean, there are labeling systems out there, but we don't necessarily care which you use, as long as you use a system. And then we can make sure that, if that information is there, right, so that we know this piece of ductwork corresponds to your air handler system, then our system can track, right, the percentage complete for the air handler system. It just needs to be consistent throughout the BIM. You don't necessarily need to use one system versus another. Does that make sense? And Thomas, you're muted.
Yes. I just chatted. Yes, thank you. That's all I need. Thanks.
Fantastic. Do you have any other questions, Andrew? Thank you for being a part of the conversation. So one thing that I will ask everybody, and maybe Rafi will start with you, it seems like a lot of people don't use this type of technology, and I can totally understand. I mean, we work with Smith Group. We're a big company. We have our own laser scanners. But for a smaller company or a company who doesn't have their own types of in-house, scanners or that type of, software, what have you, what would you say? How could you tell people what's the easy way to start to utilize this? With your phone, I know there's a reality capture app.
So I was going to say, and Sean, I think what Sean was talking about, the future is our phone. So I didn't start this company until 2017, even though I had the idea 6 years earlier. And the reason for that is mobile scanning really came to market around that time, which has put downward pressure on the price point for scanning. So scanning is becoming much more affordable even for smaller companies and smaller jobs. The second thing is, you now have the new iPhones that are going to be hopefully coming out in a couple of months will have LiDAR built into them. The new iPads that are available now already do. There are certain limitations to that LiDAR system, primarily the range. So you've got a 15-foot range, which is not enormous, obviously. But the quality is actually pretty decent, and I expect the range will get better. I expect hardware systems will come out that are, take advantage of those LiDAR on a chip that's available today that Apple's taking advantage of. That'll bring the cost of LiDAR down further and make it available to everyone. So I think there are price points at which people can get involved now, and it's only going to get better.
Yeah, so it's about a third of the users, as we saw in the poll, aren't using reality capture, at least part of this discussion. So hopefully that will make it a little easier. Anybody else? Tim, Ian, Sean, you guys have any feedback?
So my rhetorical question back to the group would be, is it more expensive to do it, or is it more expensive not to do it? And the reason, it's easy to answer that once you've prevented a problem that costs a lot of money. But before you have, it is quite the investment. Some of these scanners that we've got on these job sites are upwards of $100,000. Now, hopefully you never realize that that savings because you prevent all the problems because of your construction methodology. But to assume that that's going to be the case, it's kind of that iceberg analogy of, when someone gets hurt, the upfront cost of them, getting them to the doctor and, stitching them up, that's far and beyond the cheaper end of that spectrum. And so, I see some of my coworkers on this call, and so I'm gonna pull from one of the lessons learned that they shared that really solidified this use case for the client that we're both working for, in that they were doing these stub ups, 4-inch stub ups in the data hall and of this massive facility, like 500,000 square feet per building. And through the scanning, they realized that the stub ups were 4 feet off. Unfortunately, the person that did the layout came off the wrong column line, I think is the root cause, which is completely understandable. They pulled from the column line, they pulled 4 feet, or pulled whatever the dimension that it was supposed to be. They spray painted a little dot to say, here's where the rack is supposed to sit. Now through scanning, we caught that before the slab was poured. If we hadn't caught that, it would have been easily a $100,000 mistake. So right there is the cost of the scanner. So now hopefully it's not one of those things where it's like, wow, since we paid this $100, we prevented this $100,000. But that's my question back to the group, is to think through, what is that, if you could think of one big mess up where you're like, man, that was really expensive fix. Ask yourself, could it have been prevented with reality capture? If it is, if the answer is yes, or it could be yes, then you gotta ask yourself, do I want to spend money to prevent the problem, or do I want to spend potentially more money to fix the problem?
Absolutely. Well, yeah, the ROI on that you're already getting your investment back, just that first project, right?
Yeah,
Sean,
and ROI is a little difficult to, I don't like the term ROI, because if you say I've prevented this door from being installed wrong, it saved me $100 and there's 15,000 doors, then it's $15,000 that I saved. ROI can be a slippery slope, but when you've got those hard examples of installing the conduit wrong, we installed one of the first vaults for our telecom, which is the lifeblood of a data center. We installed it at the wrong elevation and no one caught it with a grade rod. So there's those things that inevitably happen. We make mistakes, we're human. And if we can prevent those from becoming larger problems after it's too late to fix them, that's really where we're saving money.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I'll just say, I mean, on the cost saving side of things, you know, calculating the ROI for catching errors can be tricky because hopefully you don't always have major errors in every project. And even if you do, if you catch something, you can't always calculate how much you saved because maybe your super would have caught it tomorrow. It's hard to say for sure. But we had one issue we caught on another data center, not being built by Tim, where it was definitely a 7-figure savings. The whole the whole steel system was off. It had settled by some crazy amount, over a foot of settling, that nobody noticed and nobody caught, and they could have built for months before it really causing issues. And the reason they caught it was because the owner required regular laser scanning.
I want to jump to Raj. Raj has been a wonderful part of this discussion. Thank you so much for your questions. Can you hear us, Raj? Are you live with us?
I can. Can you hear me? Good.
I can.
Okay. So I'm a mechanical engineer, and so most of my questions are bent from picking up the asset data as far as piping systems, and then just how, so if you say a hot water pipe should have been a cold water pipe, as a simple example, there isn't any way to kind of pick that up right now.
Depends what you mean by that. You can actually sometimes pick up that a hot water pipe was, if they got switched, right? The way we pick up the systems is, if in the BIM you have the cold water pipe, and in the BIM you've got the hot water pipe, and then you've got objects within the scan that roughly match those positions or match those layouts, and particularly the origin points, right? Because pipes and HVAC move like crazy from their initial plans, but the points at which they pass through concrete or any other kind of structural system tend to be pretty static.
So it'll all be just dumb XYZ type coordinate. You wouldn't be able to pick up like an expansion joint telling me that it's a hot water pipe, or I've got a chilled water pipe insulation of 2 inches. Those kind of things, could you build in, or?
You can. So what we can't tell you is whether, if you run cold water through your hot water pipe, let's say you laid everything correctly, but you just decided to, at the very end where you're not scanning, you decided to flip the arrangement. We couldn't tell you that.
Right, and I'm more geared towards probably like a mechanical room, applying AI in a mechanical room where you've got the spaghetti, as you mentioned, and making sure all the systems are piped.
So the way we track those systems is, again, we understand that anything that is pipe-like, whether it's piping itself or ductwork, is going to deviate or can deviate pretty wildly from the way it's planned in the BIM. But the points at which it passes through structural elements tend to deviate in just very predictable ways. And so if we can match up those origin and exit points on the scan and the BIM, we can say, okay, this piece of pipe, even though it may have deviated wildly from its plan, is in fact the same cold water pipe that is present in the BIM.
All right, last question. I appreciate all your time. And this is kind of the group, so if we are moving towards that singular black box digital twin, the architects, engineers draw it in Revit, then it's turned over to multiple construction. So should we all kind of just keep it to Revit products, or is there something that turns over to facilities at the end where because they're going to want it to tie into their work order system, their CMMSs, and so that's the part that's very difficult.
Yeah, I'll let the rest of the team speak to this as well, but we would love if everybody did everything in Revit.
Right.
We haven't seen that happen. Most of our facility management clients do want everything back in Revit, and what we've actually started working on is helping people get a Navisworks model that has origins in various systems into translate that into a Revit model easily. Haven't completed that piece of work yet, but we are working on it.